So, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be presenting this piece of research to you, which we conducted, we've just recently completed, which was funded and supported by Alex TLC. So I've got my PowerPoint slide. I very much hope that's going to work. And I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my colleague, Charlotte Nutting, who conducted the study with me. So it's about parental experiences of having a child diagnosed with cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy. So a little background to start with, which you're probably all extremely familiar with. So ALD is a rare X-linked neurodegenerative disease. It's caused by the ABCD1 gene defects, and it's characterized by demyelination of the central nervous system and adrenal cortical insufficiency. And some of the complexity is because there are several different disease phenotypes, each with its own clinical features and prognosis. The most severe form is childhood cerebral, ALD, which occurs in about 38 of males under the age of 18 that have this gene defect. And the only effective treatment is hematopoietic stem cell transplant, which is much more likely to be successful in treating if the disease is treated at an early stage. There is very little research on the parental experiences, which are actually critically important to inform health and social care delivery. And the research we've got at the moment is limited to a couple of studies from Taiwan and from Japan, which broadly indicate the challenges that those populations had. So there's a real gap in that broader understanding, which is what we seek to address with this study. So the aim of our study was to explore parental experiences of having a child diagnosed with this condition and the psychosocial impact of that condition on them and the family. Just a little bit about what we did. So this was a descriptive qualitative study design. We recruited parents to the study with the assistance of Alex TLC, who promoted it via all their communication networks. And we collected involved in interviewing parents using a structured topic guide with a few questions and then lots of opportunity for people to tell their story. And we did that remotely, which allowed us to easily access people all over the country using Zoom and in one couple of cases telephone. And we used a structured kind of well-recognised approach to analyse the data, which is called a thematic analysis approach. Before we started any of this, we submitted a proposal to the University Ethics Committee, who approved it from an ethical point of view. So just to give you an overview of who participated in this, we interviewed 12 parents from 11 families, and that was 10 mums and 2 dads, which was great because you don't often get to hear dads' voices in these sorts of pieces of research. Those parents collectively had 25 children, of whom 20 were boys, and 16 of those boys had been diagnosed with ALD. Through one of the following routes. They'd either presented with those neurocognitive changes, which indicated CCALD, or they had initially presented with adrenal insufficiency, or they had been identified following sibling testing. So when you do a thematic analysis approach with this sort of research, what you do is you identify a number of themes and the sub-themes within those, which collectively sort of provide insights into different aspects and elements of the collective experience. And this is our thematic approach. So there are 3 themes here, which I'm going to go through in turn. And you'll see that each of those three themes has three sub-themes. So I'm going to go through those on the following slides. And as you'll see, there are quotes there taken from the interviews to kind of provide a more detailed insight into the points that I'm making. They illustrate the points that we're making. And you'll see names attributed to those, just to advise those are all pseudonyms, which we applied when the interviews were transcribed for reasons of anonymity. So I'll go through the slides, and I'll leave you time to read the quotes. I'm not going to read the quotes out because I think there aren't many things that are much more irritating when you have a PowerPoint presentation of this sort. So I'll leave a few little time for you to read those. So the first theme was about possibility of treatment, and within that there were these three sub-themes: too late for treatment, close to the threshold, and watching and waiting. And this really describes those three circumstances within which parents found themselves. So for those where it was too late for treatment, the first indication that parents had that something was wrong were neurocognitive changes, but those changes were readily explainable and they didn't cause parents undue concern. So things like a visual squint, attention difficulties, behavioural changes. But those difficulties became increasingly apparent during the period of investigation, and that indicated that something was seriously wrong. But parents were not prepared, they were totally unprepared for the diagnosis that offered no possibility of treatment. As the husband said, it was just literally unbelievable. The idea that there are no treatments nowadays for a disease is extremely hard to, I think, to conceive. And the rapid deterioration that followed was intensely difficult for parents to witness. Every loss of function that they witnessed effectively served as a separate bereavement event, as James's words suggest. And another major problem was the rate of deterioration, which was extremely difficult to manage because support services were inevitably behind the curve. By the time you went through a process of assessment and ordering devices and aids, deterioration had occurred to the extent that they were no longer of any value. Because they were no longer fit for purpose, as Sadiq's quote suggests. The second group were those who were close to the treatment threshold. So those individuals where at diagnosis there were early signs of cerebral damage, which offered just a very small window of opportunity for treatment. Those where the low score was very close to the treatment threshold. And despite the uncertain outcomes in that situation, parents really felt they had to accept the offer of the glimmer of hope that treatment offered to their children, and were doing it against a backdrop of another child who was so they're watching their other child who was too late for treatment deteriorate and making judgments in the light of that. So as Sophie said, there isn't a choice. You have to do it, even though parents were aware of the likelihood that the limitations and the possibility of the treatment not working. Notwithstanding that, realizing that the treatment hadn't worked and witnessing that during the process was extremely painful, Sadiq indicates. The third group were those in that watching and waiting category. So these were the situations where there were no signs of cerebral damage at diagnosis. And in this group, it led to a period of regular monitoring to identify those very early signs of damage that would indicate the need for HSCT. That was a period of prolonged limbo for parents, which was punctuated by heightened anxiety at the time of each scan. So a bit of a roller coaster over that 6-month period, where the anticipation and the prospect that the results would indicate the need for indicate cerebral damage and the need for treatment was palpably anxiety producing, to the extent that whilst it wasn't an inevitable outcome that children would need a bone marrow transplant, when it did show on the scan that that's what they needed, as Scarlett suggests, it was almost a relief, because it meant you could do something. That sense of powerlessness was replaced by the possibility to actually take action. And in all those cases where the children that followed this route, the HSCT was successful. But it wasn't the end of the story. There are ongoing concerns which cast a slight shadow over the situation because of the unknown circumstances about the long-term implications of ALD. As Liz's words suggest, they're in a good place, but there's still that shadow. It's always in the background. You know what's going to happen next? How's this going to pan out? The second theme was about talking about the diagnosis, and parents wanted to achieve a balance between, on the one hand, protecting their child from the reality of the situation, but also helping them to understand so that they could cope better with the situation they were in. Now, where HSCT was an option, they could offer positive and hopeful messages focused on the future. So Aisha explains everything. She framed it in terms of the short-term pain for the long-term benefit of being able to, her son being able to do what he wanted and what he enjoyed. And that's how she proceeded in terms of preparing him for treatment. Where there was no possibility of treatment, the focus had to be different. So the focus there was very much on helping the children make sense of what was happening to their body. So helping them understand, as Ellie says, why her son was falling over and why he was struggling to write. And that helped him. It helped him and it helped her because it helped him. So they found this a very positive thing in the short term. The explanations they gave tend to be as limited as you could get away with, and that provided a degree of good protection, but it meant that the explanations rapidly became redundant. They didn't keep up with the rate of deterioration. So, as James suggests, we gave him as little information as we needed along the way, but we've had to, he's got more questions. We've got to revise that and offer more explanation. The wider family conversations, very difficult. Parents found it intensely difficult to talk to people about a disease that no one had heard of and that they barely understood themselves, and to talk about a prognosis for their child that they were struggling to comprehend. And the genetic implications of the disease added another dimension, with some intensely difficult family conversations and a irrational but understandable a feeling of responsibility that they had, not only the responsibility to share the information with the wider family, with children that might be at risk of the disease, but also slightly illogically for the pain and distress that resulted. So the two quotes from Liz and Ellie here, I think, really capture that, how intensely difficult it was to tell their sisters that their sons might also have the condition that they had. As Ellie says, it's with my rational head on. I know it's not true, but she felt responsible for the hurt because she was the one who'd pushed for an investigation for her son, and the distress of others she took on in addition to her own distress. The community of support, an understanding community of support, were invaluable. So having access to people that understood the condition and what parents were going through because they'd been through it themselves, as I say, it was invaluable. It provided critical emotional and practical support and really helped to counteract those feelings of isolation that are really common with these rare conditions, because no one else knows what you're going through or even what you're talking about. So having people that do understand is absolutely has a vital and essential role there. But because of those very phenotypic differences within the disease, and because of those different, those three different treatment routes and pathways that children followed in terms of access or not access to treatment, severity of disease, it moderated to some extent the perceived sense of entitlement for those who judge themselves against others within the community. And as Aisha explains, you didn't quite feel that she was worthy of the support because the position she was in was much more positive than that others had been in. So it's a little bit moderated in that sense. The third theme is about managing the needs of the family. So the first thing was an overarching kind of determination, really, by the parents to keep things normal for their son. And this manifested particularly in terms of things like resisting the medicalisation and resisting to a degree the involvement of health and social care services, or framing them in a way that was much more child-centric, if you like. So physio and occupational therapy input was explained as play sessions rather than anything therapeutic. And parents tried hard to keep health and care services at arm's length, which of course became increasingly difficult with the deteriorating condition. So as Holly said, they kept going until she was effectively on the floor. So to the point of exhaustion, and at which point recognised that they had to have some help, but tried to hang on there as much as they possibly could. And alongside there was a real desperation, really, for parents to keep doing nice things and still be a mum rather than a carer, as Ellie explained. But the altered cognition that the children were experiencing made that really very difficult, and that in itself added further to parental distress. I think Jenny's quote here is really poignant and really captures those very difficult emotions. So, of course, in many of these families, there were siblings, and the caring for those siblings was another complexity within the family life. So siblings, of course, were deeply affected by their brother's disease and the impact it had on family functioning. And for parents, extremely difficult to hear their young children actually verbalise that current reality and kind of reflect and agonise over the situation they were in now as a result of the condition. Parents recognise the needs of siblings, tend to be overlooked, acutely aware of this, and really, in addition to everything else, really worked overtime to minimise the effect through explanation to try and explain and justify the situation, but also about ensuring one-to-one time, so doing some sort of tagging between family members to ensure that siblings also received the kind of time and support that they needed, as Jasmine indicates. And then finally, third one is about living the new normal. So there was intense pressure on parents as they adjusted to the increased physical, social, emotional and financial demands, and that nightmare of trying to keep all the plates spinning and organise everything on top of basic everyday life. And support from family, friends and colleagues came in 4 main types. So there was practical support, a listening ear, someone to offload to, a welcome distraction, some opportunity to have, to be able to talk about something else for a while and be in a slightly different place for a while. And then random acts of kindness, which made people feel valued, particularly when they were really up against it. And collectively, these 4 help parents to cope with the situation they were in and adjust to the new normal. So just to conclude, recognising I'm a minute over, this is the first study that offers detailed and multifaceted insights into what a diagnosis of CCALD means from the perspective of parents and family. And our findings do highlight that stark difference between those situations of early diagnosis and those of late diagnosis in terms of the availability of and likely effectiveness of treatment. They also contribute to that body of evidence, therefore, that indicates the need for newborn screening and identify areas where families may benefit from improved support. And we suggest particularly around family communication and timely approaches to providing appropriate care and support. So that's all I want to say. I'll just acknowledge those parents who were generous with their time and their honesty in sharing their stories with us, and to Alex TLC for their funding and their support with this project. And just to advise, we have there's a publication in process which will be open access and able to be read by anyone, and we'll of course keep the community up to date with that. Just a couple of references there for those that are interested, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Hilary.